With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will update the House on the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the continued action that the government is taking to strengthen our economic and energy security in response to the conflict in the Middle East. Mr. Speaker, we did not start this war, we did not join this war. But since the war in the Middle East broke out, I have been clear-eyed about my duty to be responsive to a changing world and responsible in the national interest. The best economic policy today is our diplomatic policy: negotiation, de-escalation, and the permanent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Last week in Washington, I held talks with world finance ministers, including the US Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. I struck a joint agreement with 10 other major economies calling for a swift and lasting negotiated resolution to the conflict and agreeing to avoid unnecessary trade restrictions to support energy and food security. We agreed to maintain maximum economic pressure to ensure that Russia cannot profit from this war. And I was proud to announce the UK's third tranche of the extraordinary revenue acceleration funding for Ukraine's defences, as well as continuing to work with the US administration to increase economic pressure on Iran. The Prime Minister has also led global action, convening a summit of nations with the President of France to work together to support freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The UK will continue to play its part, including engagement with the insurance industry to support shipping when conditions allow. We are continuing to plan for every eventuality, but we must deal with the economic costs that are already being felt. I reject the demands for a knee-jerk response to this crisis that would put household finances at risk through higher inflation and higher interest rates. Every choice that I make will be about keeping costs down for families and for businesses. That's why I have extended the 5p cut for fuel duty twice since the election, saving the average motorist £90 a year compared with the plans that I inherited. It is why I have frozen prescription charges for 2 years in a row, frozen rail fares for the first time in 30 years, and why I am taking £150 off energy bills, with additional help for those struggling with the cost of heating oil. And it is why I've expanded the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme to over 10,000 manufacturers, addressing long-term competitiveness and cutting electricity costs from this year. During the last energy shock, the previous government's package of unfunded, untargeted support saw more than a third of the direct energy bill support go to the wealthiest households. That meant higher inflation, higher interest rates, and higher taxes. I will not repeat those mistakes. Last week, the IMF said that my plan is the appropriate response to the conflict. And I led a joint statement with 10 other major economies, agreeing to coordinate our domestic responses to ensure that they are both responsive and responsible. Mr. Speaker, this government has the right plan for our economy. At the spring forecast, we saw how the action that we have taken since the election has prepared Britain to better weather this conflict. Inflation was at 3% and set to fall to target, a lower base than at the outset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when inflation was high and rising. Borrowing was set to fall more over this Parliament than in any other in the G7. We are set to reduce the deficit by £20 billion from 5.2% to 4.3% of GDP this year. And I increased our financial buffers, with headroom against our stability room of £23.6 billion, so that we can weather shocks and keep borrowing costs down. Last week, the IMF welcomed the UK's notable improvement in our public finances. I am clear that the best way that we can build a stronger, more resilient economy is through economic growth. I welcome the recent figures showing that the economy grew by 0.5% in the 3 months to February, and upgraded growth for the 3 months to January to 0.3%. I also welcome this morning's labour market figures for February, showing unemployment coming down and real wages continuing to rise as they have in every month since I became Chancellor, adding to the evidence that the government has set the right economic plan to steer our economy through the uncertainty ahead. But as I have said, the war in Iran will come at a cost. Last week, the IMF published their updated forecasts for the global economy in response to the war. They reduced their expectations for GDP growth in the United Kingdom and increased their expectations for inflation. This builds on their judgment that the UK is more exposed to energy price shocks than our counterparts, a problem that the previous government failed to address in 14 years. And on the IMF's observation that since the last energy crisis, the UK has had higher inflation than other countries, where the aftermath of Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget and the previous government's untargeted, unfunded support package contributed to a more persistent rise in inflation and in interest rates than in other countries around the world. The IMF's forecasts are a stark reminder of why we must stick to our economic plan and go further and faster on delivering our economic security. Since the election, we have invested in clean, homegrown energy, in renewables and in nuclear power. In 2025, we imported 17% less gas than we did in 2021. And gas generation now sets the wholesale price for electricity around a third less frequently than it did in the early 2020s, meaning that our energy system is now more secure and less exposed to volatile global energy prices. Today, we are going further, with a package of changes to reduce our reliance on imported oil and gas, boost the use of renewables, and smooth the impact of energy price shocks. First, oil and gas production from the North Sea is an important and valuable resource, and its workforce is a vital asset for our country. That is why we are harnessing our domestic supply by managing existing fields for their entire lifetimes, including by allowing tiebacks for those fields to ensure that they remain viable. Today, in advance of legislation, we are publishing further details on tiebacks, which I first announced in the budget, which external analysis has predicted could result in tens of millions more barrels of oil and gas being available for UK supply. Today's announcement gives industry greater clarity to support investment in these projects and maximise supply from our existing sites to support our energy security. Second, we are sweeping away the barriers to new renewables investment, accelerating vital grid infrastructure, reforming land access rules, and extending permitted development rights, as well as making more public land available for renewable infrastructure, which could unlock up to 10 gigawatts of new capacity, and helping households and businesses to switch to clean, cheaper renewable electricity through plug-in solar panels and better EV charging. And third, we are reforming our energy system. Currently, households and businesses pay more for their electricity when the price of gas is high. The electricity generator levy already recoups some of the excess returns made by generators due to high gas prices. And today I am announcing that I will extend the electricity generator levy past its scheduled conclusion in 2028. And ahead of that, I am increasing the rate of the electricity generators levy from 45% to 55%. This ensures that a larger proportion of any exceptional revenues from high gas prices are passed back to government, providing a vital revenue stream so that money is available for government to support businesses and families with the impacts of the conflict in the Middle East. But crucially, it will encourage older, low-carbon electricity generators, which supply about a third of our power, to move from market pricing to fixed-price contracts for difference. Under new proposals set out by the Energy Secretary today, and that will further weaken the link between high gas prices and the price paid for our electricity. and limiting the spikes in energy prices from driving up inflation and costs for households and for businesses. Mr. Speaker, this government has the right economic plan, a plan that was right before the conflict in the Middle East started and is now essential to weather the impact of that conflict. A plan that is backed by the IMF, a plan to keep costs down for everyone and to support those who need it most. And in a world that is more uncertain, a plan to, I wish it was more certain, and in a world that is more uncertain, a plan to build a Britain that is stronger and more secure. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shall the Chancellor Sybil Stride?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement. Mr. Speaker, the UK has some of the highest energy prices in the world. That is crippling our economy, pushing up the cost of living, and leaves us particularly exposed to energy shocks like the one we are experiencing right now. And yet, the government seems totally unwilling to accept the scale of the problem and totally unwilling to shift in their dogmatic commitment to a net zero agenda which is making us poorer. Last year, we on this side of the House came forward with our cheap power plan. We said the government needed to scrap carbon taxes, scrap the renewable subsidies which are pushing up bills, and reverse the nonsensical decision to rely on imported oil and gas instead of pursuing the common sense approach of extracting our own resources from right here in the North Sea. Under pressure from this Conservative opposition, we have seen some progress at least, but at a snail's pace, with the Energy Secretary dragged with oh so much reluctance in the direction we have set out. Mr. Speaker, the action taken goes nowhere near far enough and is not fast enough. At the budget, the government announced they would take 75% of the cost of renewals off bills, but they didn't abolish the subsidies as we called for. They are still being paid, maybe not out of people's energy bills, but out of the hard-working pockets of hard-working taxpayers. And when it comes to the vast majority of businesses in our country, this government has done nothing for them. Madam Deputy Speaker, the proposals announced today risk locking in the costs of those subsidies by including them in the new contracts for difference, which the government is hoping that energy producers will sign up to. So can the Chancellor confirm that this is indeed the case, that under these arrangements, these subsidies will not only persist, but will be guaranteed? The new contracts being announced today are, of course, voluntary. So on what basis does the government think these changes will lead to an overall reduction in energy bills? Presumably, Madam Deputy Speaker, generators will only sign up to these arrangements if they are in their own commercial interest. So how is the government going to ensure that companies do not simply game the system and end up being guaranteed higher prices? How much will these announcements reduce energy bills by? Has the Energy Secretary even provided the Chancellor with an estimate of the impact on bills? And if there is no estimate, Madam Deputy Speaker, how can the Chancellor be confident that bills will indeed be reduced, not increased? And on that point, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can put a number on our plan. It would mean £200 off household bills. Why can't the Chancellor do the same with this latest announcement? The government have also said they will get rid of carbon price support. That is welcome. But they are not doing it until next year. And the CPS is only part of the carbon tax, which we on this side of the House are clear needs to be scrapped completely. It costs both households and businesses, and it needs to go. Why will the Chancellor not commit to removing these taxes completely? And on taxes, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady noted the importance of keeping fuel duty down. But once again, she had nothing to say about the onerous increase in fuel duty she still plans to bring forward in September.
Exactly.
Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have had no meaningful action today on the issue of North Sea oil and gas. The Chancellor says she wants to reduce our exposure to global energy, yet the government is choosing to leave us more resilient on imported hydrocarbons. We all know that she is in a completely different place to the Energy Secretary. He is committed to the gradual smothering of our oil and gas sector, regardless of the cost to our economy and the loss of those jobs and tax revenues. So why does the Chancellor not urge the Prime Minister to overrule the Energy Secretary on these matters? The revenues from new oil and gas extraction are vital given the state of our public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, the current crisis shows how exposed we are and how damaging the government's net zero obsession has been to our economy, to households and to businesses. The government is right to want to reduce that exposure, but is doing too little, too late. We need an urgent change in course, not dither and delay. We need a proper cheap power plan to get bills back down, and we need it now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean, that response exposes a shadow chancellor who is out of credible ideas. Now, I thought I was sad to read in the weekend's newspapers that once again the shadow chancellor is being lined up for the sack by the leader of the opposition. But to be honest, after his performance today, I can understand her choice. Now, the Shadow Chancellor talks about the IMF. Yes, the IMF did downgrade the forecast. Why? Because of a war that was started, which his party unquestioningly backed. And because of our high exposure to global energy markets, which his party allowed. And we are taking the right choices. We did not back this war, nor did we follow the calls of the leader of the opposition or the leader of reform to join in. And we are investing in and we are reforming our energy market so that we can take back control of our energy security. The Shadow Chancellor talks about the economy. Well, let's talk about the economy. Before this war broke out, our economy grew by 0.5% in the 3 months to February and 0.3% in the 3 months to January. Inflation was expected by the Bank of England and the OBR to return to target, and interest rates have been cut by their fastest rate in 17 years compared to hitting 5.25% under the Conservatives, with mortgage costs going through the roof. He says it's the Bank of England's job to address inflation, but we had the same Bank of England when they were in government than when we were in government. They have cut interest rates when we have been in government because we got control of the public finances. They lost control of the public finances. Now, the Shadow Chancellor says that the response to a fossil fuel crisis is to rely more on fossil fuels and to reduce investment in clean, homegrown energy. And he's ignoring the fundamental lesson of both Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the conflict now in the Middle East. The Shadow Chancellor opposed new solar energy, opposed onshore wind power, and did not invest either in Sizewell C or in small modular reactors like this Labour government is doing. And just today, the CEO of Renewables UK has said that delinking results in reducing the link between volatile gas and electricity prices to help protect households and businesses against unpredictable fossil fuel costs, strengthening UK energy security. And on the issue of tiebacks, the Right Honourable Gentleman says it makes no difference, yet Offshore Energy UK says that developing fields as tiebacks addresses costs, lower emissions and extends the life of existing critical infrastructure, which is exactly why we are doing it. On delinking, the Shadow Chancellor says that it would lead to higher prices. Well, the exact opposite. The whole aim here is to move to fixed prices, and by increasing the electricity generators levy, which we don't know whether the party opposite support or oppose, by increasing the electricity generators levy, we incentivise those energy companies to come off the levy and come onto contracts for difference. And we are now beginning the negotiations with industry so that we can reduce that volatility in prices. And as the CEO of E.ON has said today, for too long the value in our energy system has flowed to the top of the chain. Today moves to start to turn that around, because instead of the volatility and the spikes that are so damaging both for family finances and business finances, we can take out of the system. But the Shadow Chancellor had nothing to say on that. And on fuel duty was never lower in 14 years under the Conservatives than it is today. And of course we are keeping all scenarios under review, but it is quite clear that the best way to bring down fuel prices is to de-escalate this conflict, not ramp it up like the Conservatives want to do. The Shadow Chancellor's got nothing to say on international cooperation, nothing to say on global negotiations to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, nothing to say on reform of our energy market, nothing to say on investment in our infrastructure. Why? Because he has no plan. Why? Because he doesn't have any ideas. Why? Because his party has no economic credibility. Labour has the right plan for our country. The Conservatives would take us right back to the bad days of high inflation, high interest rates and the mess they made of our economy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the conflict in Iran is a reminder, is also a matter of energy security and of the cost of energy. It is a reminder for the second time in 4 years of the dangers of being dependent on international fossil fuel markets and the need to reduce our dependence on them. The Select Committee has heard a lot of evidence about the importance of decoupling the price of electricity from the price of gas. So can I encourage you to bring forward the measures that are going to enable the reduction in the amount of time where gas continues to set the price of electricity? It is a pity that the party opposite didn't take that approach following the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 when they had the chance.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for that question and the important work that he's done on this issue. There are two ways to reduce the number of days in which the gas price sets the electricity price. The first is to invest more in homegrown renewables and also in nuclear, so that more of the mix is made up of electricity. And the second way to do it is to de-link gas and electricity prices, in the first instance by increasing the electricity generators levy to bring in money, but also, and this is a crucial point, to incentivise those companies who are currently getting the market price to instead to go onto a contract for difference, which gives greater certainty for families, pensioners and businesses with their bills. And that is exactly what we are doing.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Chancellor for advance sight of her statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor should have come here today to explain how she was going to use the £20 million extra that the Treasury is pulling in every single day through higher VAT, higher energy profits levy and other taxes to tackle the immediate cost of fuel crisis that is facing families and businesses today. I believe the Chancellor is just fundamentally wrong when she says that a knee-jerk response would have put household finances at risk through higher inflation and higher interest rates. Just look at what other countries are doing. Instead, the government could have used this £20 million to drive down prices. The price of petrol on the pump, the price of train fares, the price of bus fares and the price of home charging electric vehicles. By slashing those prices, it could have helped the Chancellor to control inflation and higher interest rates. It's what other countries are doing. It's what we Liberal Democrats are calling for. Madam Deputy Speaker, we Liberal Democrats were the only political party to have in our manifesto a commitment to break the link between gas and electricity prices. So we are glad that 18 months on, this government has finally listened. In addition to the measures outlined today, can I ask the Chancellor about two specific things? First of all, has the Chancellor spoken to any of the banks about rolling out low-interest loans for householders who want to do the right thing, adopt energy-saving measures, but are struggling with the upfront costs? And secondly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I met with the Competition and Markets Authority on Monday. The CMA and Ofgem both agree that there is a case to answer about the broken energy market and why hospitality and small businesses are being blocked. So would the Secretary of State join with me in writing to Ofgem and asking them to finally investigate without any further delay a broken energy market that is blocking out hospitality and small businesses from accessing the best deals?
I welcome the fact that the Honourable Lady and her party opposed this war and didn't want the UK to become involved, unlike the Conservatives and Reform. But I do find what the Honourable Lady has just set out as being fundamentally economically illiterate. I mean, the idea that a great fiscal policy is to close the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, why didn't we think of it when we came to office? If we close the Strait of Hormuz, all of our problems will be over because we can get in all of this money. And yet that is what the Honourable Lady is suggesting, that we're going to get some great windfall from a tax. The truth is the IMF and every other forecaster is clear that tax revenues are going to be lower, not higher, because of this conflict in the Middle East. And so the money that the Honourable Lady wants us to spend simply does not exist. And I'm afraid she's falling into the failed economic policies of the Conservatives, who who delivered untargeted, unfunded support, which resulted in higher interest rates, higher inflation and higher taxes. It is not targeted. She's suggesting an untargeted approach, and that is what has got us into the mess that we are in today. Now, I welcome the fact that she supports us on decoupling. That is the right thing to do with our gas and electricity prices. I regret the fact that the Honourable Lady and her party did not support the Planning Act, which enables us to build the infrastructure that we need to get the homes built and the energy infrastructure built as well. And on the specific issue about working with banks, yes, as a government, the Department for Energy is working with every high street lender and every energy company to help people who are struggling with their bills.
David Burton-Sampson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as my right honourable friend mentioned, in 2022 Liz Truss launched a household energy support package that provided blanket support to every household, including the most well-off, and it was estimated to cost between £57 and £60 billion just over the first 6 months, predominantly funded by borrowing. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the right thing to do and the fiscally responsible thing to do during this crisis is to do targeted support to those who need it most?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is the case that more than a third of the support with energy bills went to the top third of households, and that makes no sense at all, especially when those households then end up being burdened with higher interest rates on their mortgages, higher inflation in the shops and higher taxes for years to come. So the right approach is a targeted one to keep costs and interest rates down for everybody. But of course the very best economic policy would be de-escalation of this conflict, not ramping it up as the Conservatives and Reform want to do.
To Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. She'll be aware of how important aviation is to the UK economy, and particularly Heathrow, which is responsible for a huge amount of air freight and economic activity in my constituency. Given all the reports that we've had regarding the supply chain of kerosene in aviation, can I ask her what measures or discussions is she taking to ensure kerosene supply, and what consideration has she given to tax relief to ensure that our aviation sector is sustainable and continues to contribute to the UK economy?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. As you know, this government is a big supporter of our airports and the aviation sector, which is why we're backing a third runway at Heathrow, a second runway at Gatwick, as well as expansion at Stansted and Luton airports. We are in regular contact with the aviation sector. They are currently not reporting any challenges with the security of supply, but as the honourable gentleman would expect, and as the House would expect, we are planning for all different types of scenarios. But the best way to ensure the security of supply is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by working to de-escalate this conflict.
Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the fact that in this time of economic shocks, the government is playing its proper role to protect UK households from the worst harm. So can I thank the Chancellor for the work she's particularly doing with other finance ministers and governments to bring about de-escalation of the war, unlike the escalation that's advocated by others. Does she agree that in addition to the very specific measures she's talked about today and the Secretary of State for Energy has announced, that she needs to continue alongside the rest of the government to press other governments for de-escalation of the war as the best way to protect UK households?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and that's why I think the whole House welcomed the Prime Minister and the French President convening a meeting of 50 countries on Friday to work on how we could ensure the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, but then crucially the protection of vessels travelling through when it is safe to do so. And it's why I've been working with the insurance industry to ensure that the right cover will be available to vessels when it is possible to travel through the strait again. And when I was in Washington last week, I also met with our allies from the Gulf countries who made very clear the importance of both reopening the Strait of Hormuz but also preserving toll-free travel through the Strait of Hormuz.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On fuel duty, at a time when prices are going up, if the Chancellor's 5p increase goes ahead from this September through to next March, we will have the 8th highest fuel duty compared to other European countries. Surely this is not the time, and if she wants certainty, the best thing she could do is stand at that dispatch box and cancel the fuel duty hike.
I understand the concerns people have about filling up their car with petrol and diesel right now. That's why we've introduced cheaper fuel finders so that people can compare prices and get the best deal when they fill up their car. And it's also why we've had all the petrol retailers into number 11 Downing Street to ensure that we don't have any price gouging. There's still 4.5 months until September. We are preparing for every eventuality. I've extended the fuel duty freeze and the extension of the 5p cut for two times already. That means the average motorist is saving £90 more than the plans that I inherited from the Conservative Party.
Julie Minns.
Speaker, the conflict in the Middle East has again highlighted just how vulnerable our off-grid rural households are to fossil fuel-driven energy shocks. So does the Chancellor agree with me that the Warm Homes Plan is a major opportunity to upgrade rural housing and cut bills? And can she confirm what further steps the government is taking to encourage the take-up of low-carbon technology?
I thank my honourable friend for that question and raising the challenges felt in many rural communities, which is why I put in additional money to help people with the cost of heating oil, recognising that the £150 off energy bills that came in April doesn't apply to heating oil, and we wanted to make sure that people had support there. But it's also why we are extending and increasing the generosity of the Warm Homes Plan, particularly including boiler upgrades to help people in all communities, but including in rural communities where the cost of heating homes is often higher.
Stephen Flynn.
Deputy Speaker, we're very fortunate in Scotland to already produce more renewable electricity than we consume, and of course we produce more oil and gas than we consume as well. Unfortunately, though, we don't experience any benefit on our bills, and of course the oil and gas workforce, who the Chancellor had the cheek to regard as a vital asset to the country, certainly don't feel like it, because 1,000 of them are losing their jobs every single month. So if she believes in jobs, if she believes in investment, if she believes in energy security, and she believes in reducing climate emissions, can she outline why she hasn't yet moved to the OGPM and explain why she's allowing the Chancellor, the Energy Secretary, to overrule the Chancellor and prioritise imports of LNG rather than supporting domestic energy sources?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. People in Scotland and right across the UK benefited from the money off their energy bills. We're one of the few countries in the world where energy bills for households went down in April rather than going up because of the changes that I made in the budget, and of course that benefits households in Scotland as well. Today, myself and the Energy Secretary have announced changes around tiebacks. That's something that previous government could have done, but didn't do. And Offshore Energy UK has said that developing fields as tiebacks reduces costs, lowers emissions and extends the life of existing critical infrastructure. Of course, this policy will help create more and support more jobs in Scotland in this vital sector. But if the SNP are so concerned about jobs, why don't they back nuclear in Scotland, like this Labour government is backing nuclear in England and in Wales?
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Chancellor's statement today and the announcement of both her and the Energy Secretary? We've seen 2 fossil fuel shocks just in the last 5 years, which have done untold damage to our economy. Half of the recessions since the 1970s have been caused by similar fossil fuel shocks. It's really clear that the move to clean, homegrown energy is good for the economy, good for security and good for household bills as well. Could the Chancellor set out what conversations she and the Energy Secretary have already had with those organisations that might be taking up those voluntary agreements, and when might we see those voluntary agreements agreed and us seeing the benefit of breaking the link between the gas and electricity price?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. What the investment in nuclear and renewables can do is ensure our security of supply, but also security of price. And the investment in fossil fuels cannot secure security of price, because that price is determined by international markets. And that is why we're trying to get the third of power that is electricity, but not on contracts for difference, onto contracts for difference, so that we can stabilise prices and avoid the spikes that we see because of that volatility in fossil fuel prices, as the honourable gentleman has said. Myself and the Energy Secretary have already met with the energy sector to discuss this policy and the negotiation of contracts of difference, and we are confident through both the negotiations and the incentive of avoiding the higher electricity generators levy that many businesses will be happy to and willing to move through a negotiated price onto contracts for difference.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The strangely cheerful outing from the Treasury front bench today really does make them the equivalent of the band playing on the deck of the Titanic as the government sinks around them after hitting the iceberg that is Peter Mandelson. If she thinks that anybody out there genuinely thinks she has made the economy more resilient to economic shocks, then I'm sorry to say the Chancellor is living in cloud cuckoo land. I have met the families who have less money in their pay packets because of her tax raids. I have met the businesses making people redundant, cutting investments or facing closure because of her tax rises. If she wants to help people in the economy, cut taxes.
Well, today we've announced an increase in the electricity generators levy to help constituents of his and all of our constituents to get lower prices for electricity. And instead of talking the country down, maybe the honourable gentleman might want to mention the fact that the economy grew by 0.5% in February, unemployment went down today, deficit reduction is the fastest pace of any country in the G7, and in every single month that I've been Chancellor, wages have risen by more than prices. Very different from what happened when his party were in charge.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for her statement today? Can I agree that the best economic policy today is diplomatic policy? Given the situation in Iran, can she tell us more about her plans for economic pressure on the leadership there to increase pressure to de-escalate this dreadful situation?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he's absolutely right that the best economic policy is diplomatic policy, reopening the Strait of Hormuz and de-escalating this conflict, which is why the Prime Minister hosted with France the coalition meeting on Friday last week. And it's also why, when I met with the US Treasury Secretary last week, we committed to doing more to increase the sanctions and the economic pressure on Iran. And my team of Treasury officials met with US Treasury officials last week to work out what more can be done following the excellent work that our two Treasuries have already done together to increase economic pressure on Iran.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a result of this war, agricultural inflation is now running at 7.6%, more than twice general inflation levels. Red diesel has doubled in price. Fertiliser supply is under serious threat. Food prices are therefore, predictably, likely to rise subsequently, causing hardship to millions of people, partly because of Britain's lack of food security. Is it not time for the government to U-turn on the Conservatives' policy that they inherited of England now being the only country in Europe that does not use its farm payments to actively support its farmers to produce food?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and for his representation for the agricultural sector. As the honourable gentleman knows, on the two occasions where we have extended the 5p cut in fuel duty, that commensurate benefit is also applied to red diesel. But I do recognise the challenges faced by the agricultural sector and other sectors that are big users of diesel in the current conflict, and that is why we are working hard with industry to ensure that they get the support that they need, and also, crucially, why we are trying to de-escalate the conflict, reopen the Strait of Hormuz to make sure that availability of diesel and indeed fertiliser is improved.
Melanie On.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Chancellor on her statement today. The setting of electricity prices to international gas prices has long been blamed for the erratic nature of our electricity bills. Indeed, it was accepted previously by the party opposite that was going to be the case. But while they complained about it and did nothing, it's this government that is seeking to take action to disconnect those two issues. Can the Chancellor advise when she thinks that families will start to see a benefit from that decoupling of electricity from international gas prices?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Honourable Lady knows what she's talking about, not least because she's the MP for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but also from her previous career before taking her seat at the last election. There are two ways in which people will benefit. First, in the short term, through the higher electricity generators levy. We've increased that rate from 45 to 55%. That will bring in money this year that can help us as a government to relieve some of that pressure on families and businesses, but then using that higher levy to negotiate the contracts for differences at a good price for bill payers and taxpayers, so that we get rid of that volatility. And I'm confident in the months ahead, whilst we have the higher electricity generators levy in place, that we'll be able to negotiate those new contracts and reduce that volatility. And crucially, this reduction in volatility will benefit both households and businesses.
Sir Julian Lewis.
May I welcome the couple of positive references the Chancellor made a little while ago to civil nuclear power. Given that we have in this country Rolls-Royce, a world-leading specialist in the design and construction of small modular mobile nuclear reactors, what plans does the government have to support this particular sector so that we are less dependent on the whims of Iranian dictators in the future?
Thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I was really pleased last week to sign with Rolls-Royce the contract for the first fleet of small modular reactors in the UK. They'll be located in Anglesey, but it will create jobs for people from Derby to Warrington to Manchester and Sheffield, and of course in North Wales and Anglesey itself. We are also working with Rolls-Royce as they look to secure contracts overseas, as they already have with Czechia, creating more good jobs here in Britain for this exciting new technology, which will also have the benefit of secure, homegrown energy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Because of the action of this government, rural communities in Norfolk received the highest payment of support for heating oil, with over £3 million in the whole of England. But there is a huge concern we have that over 60% of the applications that have gone in have not been completed by the Conservative-run council locally. So can I ask what the Chancellor's action will be to ensure that Norfolk County Council get these payments into the pockets of my constituents?
I'm sorry to hear that the Conservative Council in North Norfolk have not completed 60% of the applications for help with heating oil. The government made more than £50 million available and targeted at those places like North Norfolk and my honourable friends' constituents that need it the most. And I'm very happy to follow up with the Council, South Norfolk, very happy to follow up with the Council to make sure that people are getting the support that they need.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm relieved that the government is now committed to breaking...
Do you think we can live without an unseemly exchange over the dispatch box? I would like to be able to hear the question of the honourable member, and I'm sure the Chancellor might also like to hear it so she can respond. Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am relieved that the government is now committed to breaking the price link between expensive gas and cheap renewables. But given that the proposed solution is voluntary for electricity generators, how will the Chancellor ensure that the proposals that she and the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero are putting forward actually deliver substantially lower bills? And if I send them to her office, will she consider the proposals from the think tank Commonwealth for a mandated, not optional, fixed price model to ensure that bill payers aren't left at the mercy of volatile international fossil fuel market?
So, as I set out in my statement today, we are delinking gas and electricity prices. As the Honourable Lady said, that is the right policy. And we will achieve it through the increase in the electricity generators levy. By increasing it to 45% to 55%, we're providing a very strong incentive for companies who still get market prices to move on to contracts for difference to avoid the electricity generators levy. And if they don't go on onto a contract for difference. They'll continue to pay the electricity generators levy, which are extended today, and we can use that money to help people with their prices. But the honourable lady's commitment to lower prices and more secure supply would be a bit more credible if they didn't oppose new nuclear and if they didn't oppose the Planning Act, which actually is going to make it easier to build the infrastructure investment in renewables and clean energy that we desperately need to lower bills and to get ourselves off fossil fuels.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement and the work that she and the Energy Secretary have done in this regard. The focus upon renewables and the decoupling of gas and electricity is most welcome. But could I just point out one of the problems that we inherited the party opposite, who've got the gall to complain about the high cost to businesses and households, that we are heading towards curtailment fees in 2030 of around about £6 billion per annum. And I wonder whether she'd be kind enough to meet with myself and the Honourable Member for Camborne and Redruth to discuss some of the technological options that are available to us to mitigate those searing costs.
I thank my honourable friend for that question and the interest that he has in this really important area. There are a number of things that we are doing on this front. First of all, the Planning Act, which passed through Parliament at the end of last year, despite the opposition of both the Conservatives and the Greens and the indifference of the Liberal Democrats, will enable us to build the infrastructure to get energy from offshore wind to people's homes and people's businesses, as well as investment in battery technology so that we can store energy. But the honourable gentleman will also have seen the announcement, I think, last week, that we're going to enable differential pricing at different times. So, for example, at weekends when demand for energy is lower, to be able to get free electricity in some cases. So these are all some of the things that we're doing to better balance demand and supply on the grid. And I'm very happy to meet with him to discuss further.
Richard Tice.
Madam Deputy Speaker, is the Chancellor aware that the price of gas in the US is 10% lower than the start of the war, whilst here in the UK it's 30% higher, proving that if you produce what you consume, Chancellor, actually there is a domestic price of gas? So could she have a word in the shell-like ear of the Secretary of State for Energy and tell him to get on and approve the licences at Jackdaw and beyond, including onshore? More gas, more production, lower prices.
I think the honourable gentleman just said that he's in favour of fracking. If so, I look forward to campaigning against him on that.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Chancellor for her statement and for the work that she's doing during this globally difficult time. As a proud coastal, naval and defence city, Portsmouth understands that economic, national and climate security are inseparable, from household bills to flood resilience and defence jobs. So will the Chancellor reassure families and businesses in my constituency that today's actions such as decoupling will protect them from rising costs, support the jobs so vital to our city, but also ensure we have a city for future generations?
I thank my honourable friend for that question and for standing up for her constituents in Portsmouth. The purpose of decoupling gas and electricity prices is to reduce the volatility. And we all know from our constituencies how much particularly lower income families and pensioners struggle with the volatility in gas and electricity prices because it is an essential and you need it for everyday use. And so decoupling will smooth out some of that volatility in the price of energy, giving greater certainty to families, pensioners and also businesses who all have to contend with the volatility of the fossil fuel market. That's why we want to move to more contracts for difference, which is what today's policy will achieve.
Dylan.
The Chancellor in her statement outlined a plan for tomorrow, but no help for today. The residents in Newbury, the small businesses, the farmers, want to know how high the Chancellor will allow petrol prices, will allow red diesel, will allow fertiliser to go until she decides to take positive action and reduce the cost of living crisis on those people in the Newbury constituency. How high does it have to go, Chancellor?
I would say to the honourable gentleman that in Newbury and indeed in all of our constituencies, people got £150 off their energy bills in April this year. There are very few countries in the world where energy bills fell in April. In most countries in the world, they are going up. And that was only possible because of the measures that I took in the budget last year. I have extended the 5p cut in fuel duty 2 times already since I became Chancellor. And obviously, we are following what's happening in the Middle East very carefully, looking at the impact on the UK economy, families and businesses, and we'll be ready to respond. But the best way to get bills down and prices at the pumps down is to de-escalate this conflict and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That is the policy of his party, and it's the policy of this government, because that is the best way to help people with the costs of energy.
So here, Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister was right in not taking part in the war led by Donald Trump and Netanyahu. The Chancellor is right by not doing a knee-jerk reaction to this economic difficulty. However, will the Chancellor keep under active consideration those that are most vulnerable, those that are on benefits, and hard-working families who will struggle to pay for food to be put on the table and choosing between energy bills, and if need be, then action be taken immediately?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And when the previous government intervened in the case of an energy price shock, more than a third of the benefit went to the top third of income earners. That makes no sense at all when government resources are stretched and when it only resulted in higher interest rates, higher inflation and higher taxes on the exact same people, which is why we are looking at what targeted action could be taken. And it's also why at the beginning of this month, the new state pension increased by up to £575, and we got rid of the 2-child limit and universal credit, which will be responsible for lifting almost 500,000 children out of poverty during the course of this Parliament.
Colin Lockhart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, no farmers, no food, no hauliers, empty shelves, no construction, a country that's not moving forward. In Northern Ireland, these 3 industries are now taking to the streets to protest, clear evidence that this government's inaction is pushing them to the brink. So today, will the Chancellor do the right thing and commit to cutting fuel duty, scrapping punitive carbon taxes and properly supporting the industries and sectors that are fundamental to this country's security and stability?
I thank the honourable lady for that question. In Northern Ireland and across the country, people got £150 off their energy bills in April, and of course Northern Ireland was the biggest beneficiary for the support in heating oil, which went disproportionately to Northern Ireland, given the reliance on heating oil in Northern Ireland compared with the rest of the country. The Business Industrial Competitiveness Scheme will reduce business energy costs for 10,000 manufacturing firms from this year, taking up to 25% off their electricity cost. And decoupling will reduce prices for electricity for both businesses and also for households. And when those contracts for difference come in, that will have a direct impact. But in the meantime, the higher electricity generators levy, which is coming in this year, will provide revenue so that the government can help cushion this shock for both businesses and families.
I'm only going to plan to run the statement until 2 o'clock. There are many members still standing, so short questions and perhaps short answers would be very helpful to get as many as possible in. Andrew Pakes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor is right. This was not our war, but its impacts are being felt by businesses and families in my constituency of Peterborough. What's almost as shocking as the recent price hike is how exposed our country is because of a decade of underinvestment in nuclear, onshore wind and updating our power networks by the party opposite. So can the Chancellor reassure me that whilst we keep a razor-like focus on the cost of living for families, we will also do our utmost to speed up the development and renewal of our energy networks so we can power this country from our own sources, not just relying on imports?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is not our war. We chose not to join it, unlike the parties opposite, the Reform and the Conservatives, who are egging us on to do so. But we do need to become less exposed to global fossil fuel markets, which is why the Planning and Infrastructure Act will enable us to build the energy infrastructure we need, why we have signed off Sizewell C and a fleet of small modular reactors, why we're giving planning permission to solar farms, and why we've ended the effective moratorium on onshore wind, the cheapest form of electricity, to keep prices down for families, businesses and pensioners.
Manira Wilson. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor said in her statement, every choice I make will be about keeping costs down for families and businesses. Yet when I speak to small business owners in high streets across my constituency of Twickenham, Teddington and the Hamptons, especially cafe and restaurant owners, they tell me the soaring energy and food prices as a result of war are only compounding the pain they were feeling as a result of her choices to hike up national insurance for employers and doubling, in some cases, their business rates. So can I ask the Chancellor, what action will she take this month, this quarter, to help those businesses stay afloat, not in a year's time, because we need to see them stay open for our communities?
Hear, hear. The best thing we could do as a government is keep inflation and interest rates down. Since I became Chancellor, wages have risen faster than prices in every single month, giving people more money to spend, and interest rates have been cut 6 times, which will benefit all of our constituents, but perhaps most of all those in London, where house prices in places like Twickenham are more expensive, putting more money in the pockets of people. The announcement today around the Business Industrial Competitiveness Scheme takes up to 25% of energy bills from this month for 10,000 businesses, and decoupling will help all businesses with their energy costs. The electricity generators levy will bring in money this year, and then the new contracts for difference will reduce volatility and price spikes for all businesses.
Alex Baker.
Speaker, in my constituency I hear from many businesses, small businesses, who are worried about rising energy bills and what that means for their ability to grow and create jobs. So I welcome the measures the Chancellor has outlined today, particularly around decoupling gas and electricity, which will help safeguard my constituents from these international spikes. But everyone in this situation has to play their part. The government is doing their bit. Could the Chancellor set out what conversations she's having with the energy companies themselves on how they can further support businesses with the energy costs at a time of global instability?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I understand that the concerns that families and businesses have around the cost of energy and the risk of second-round effects if that's passed on to other goods and services in the economy. That is why my focus is on keeping interest rates and inflation down for everybody, and also why we're working to de-escalate this conflict. We are also working with energy companies to ensure that people that are struggling with energy debt, for example, are supported, and that people are not taken off of contracts.
Dave Dugan.
Deputy Speaker, I raised with the Chancellor on the 3rd of March during her vacuous spring statement that the war that had just started in the Middle East was going to have an inevitable and immediate consequence on energy prices, and I asked her what she was going to do about it, and she said that she had no plans to do anything about it. And here we are, she comes here today like the coo's tail, talking about fiddling about with contracts for difference next year, while my constituents are currently nearly paying £2 a litre for diesel. And in Ireland, the government introduced €750 million to support farmers, to support hauliers, to support agriculture and fisheries and household energy bills. If she was to do the same thing, it would be £8 billion. Where's the £8 billion for our communities, Chancellor?
In the last 2 weeks, we've announced up to 25% off energy bills for 10,000 manufacturers starting from this month. We have announced today tiebacks, which has been welcomed by OE UK to exploit more of our energy resource in the North Sea. And we've announced an increase in the electricity generators levy to bring in money to help with the costs of energy. we are one of the few countries in the world where energy bills went down in April because of the decisions that I made in my budget. And since I became Chancellor, wages have risen by more than prices in every single month, and interest rates have been cut 6 times. That is the difference that we are making. It would be nice if the SNP used the record funding we've given them to cut NHS waiting lists rather than seeing them rise and rise.
Crichton.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for her statement and her nimble response to the energy shock, including support for heating oil consumers who make up half the households in Hill and Yare. Of course, the future of energy security is not an either-or. We must pursue renewables with a community share in the wealth of wind, and we must use the tiebacks she detailed to fully exploit existing licences in the North Sea. Can I ask the Chancellor to encourage other ministers to match her commitment by hastening the review of Jackdaw and Rosebank, not just to ensure energy security, but to send a message to workers that we are with them in the North Sea and the wild Atlantic for years to come?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he's absolutely right that we need a balanced energy policy. Some parties oppose renewables, some parties oppose nuclear, some parties oppose oil and any oil and gas. The Labour Party, this government, has a balanced energy policy, investing in new nuclear, small modular reactors and Sizewell C, investing in renewables, solar, onshore and offshore wind, and yes, ensuring that there is a bright future for North Sea oil and gas. That's why today we set out our policy and more detail on tiebacks, and it's why in the not too distant future the Energy Secretary, in a quasi-judicial way, will make a decision on Jackdaw and Rosebank after the courts quashed the decision of the previous government.
Pippa Halings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We welcome the government announcement to cut the link between wholesale gas and electricity prices, helping to shield families across the UK from volatile fossil fuel prices, and using the very measure that Liberal Democrats proposed over a year ago. But it's now time to go further and faster to fix a broken energy market that sees households and businesses not having cheaper energy bills when powered by solar and wind, and even having to pay on their energy bills to turn off wind farms in British waters. I've written to the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, and will she meet with me to discuss our proposals to accelerate reforms, bring down energy bills and secure our energy supply? Thank you.
Well, I agree with the Honourable Lady around decoupling, and that is why we're using an increase in the electricity generators levy to bring in money immediately, but to incentivise companies to move on to contracts for difference. And in terms of having to pay when the solar and the wind can't be used, it would be a little bit more plausible if the Liberal Democrats hadn't have sat on their hands during the planning and infrastructure bill, which will actually enable the energy infrastructure to be built that will bring electricity to people's homes, lower people's bills, and give us the energy security that we want to see.
Herman.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, now the Chancellor will know that Auto Trader announced last week that for the first time the average cost of a new electric vehicle has fallen below the average cost of a new petrol vehicle. There's never been a better time to switch to EVs. Can the Chancellor elaborate on how these targeted announcements and some of the changes she's making today will support the switch to electric vehicles?
It's a really good point from my honourable friend. So a couple of things that we're doing today to make it more cost-effective to get an electric vehicle. First of all, the decoupling of gas and electricity prices will mean that electricity prices are not going to be set by high gas prices, which reduces the costs of filling up with electricity in an electric vehicle. But we're also making it easier for people to install electric vehicle charge points, including on their streets and in their homes, and things like making solar panels more available, including in high street shops, to enable people to benefit from that cheap electricity, which they can use to power their homes and their cars.
Robert Jenrick.
Kevin Brewer is a domiciliary care worker from Northern Ireland. He says he loves his job, but he drives 70 miles every day. And he told the BBC this week that for the first time he considered phoning in and saying that he couldn't do his job. In the end, he decided to put the cost of the fuel on his credit card. Chancellor, people are suffering across the country. Can I invite her to come on Monday to meet people like Kevin at the National Fuel Tax protest on Whitehall, where motorists, white van men and women, care workers and many others from across the United Kingdom will come together to ask her to take action now to cut VAT on fuel and to say she will not increase fuel duty in September.
Yeah. Fuel duty today has never been lower than it was in the 14 years when he was a Conservative Member of Parliament. As I have said on numerous occasions, we are keeping under review fuel duty, but the best way to reduce the costs for people who are reliant on their cars is to de-escalate this conflict, which is the exact opposite policy of Reform UK, who wanted to join in this conflict and who said when the conflict started that we should stand with America. Well, I do not agree that we should be standing with America. We should be standing for our own country and families and businesses in our country.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is important that we look at long-term measures like decoupling gas and electricity prices, because we know previous temporary measures haven't stopped our exposure to these shocks, leading to further insecurity for residents and businesses. So can the Chancellor say how quickly households and businesses like textile manufacturers in Huddersfield will benefit from this new pricing model? And can she say a little bit more about accelerating vital grid infrastructure? Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for raising concerns of people in Huddersfield. Well, from this month, we are helping 10,000 manufacturing businesses in the industrial strategy sectors with the cost of electricity, reducing it by up to 25%. And today, we've announced that we are increasing the electricity generators levy, which will bring in more money for the Exchequer, which we can use to help people with the costs of this war, a war that we did not start, but where, of course, people in Huddersfield, Leeds and around the country are feeling the consequences of.
Stefan Corone.
On heating oil, members of her Treasury team have been keen to point out that the small amount of funding, about £35 a household equivalent, was just the first step. Can she outline when the next step will come to support houses that are dependent on heating oil?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. We were pleased to be able to announce tens of millions of pounds to help people with the cost of heating oil in the same way in which we brought down gas and electricity bills for families and pensioners across the UK because of my budget decisions last year. I think it is really important that local authorities now make sure that that money is available to people. We heard from South Norfolk, for example, earlier that 60% of applications have not been processed. We need to make sure that that money gets to the people who need it. And of course, as I said, we'll keep under review additional support. But the best way, and his party agrees with this, to bring down bills for families, businesses and pensioners is to de-escalate this conflict and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is why our diplomatic policy is so important here.
John Whitby.
Madam Deputy Speaker, according to modelling from NISO, gas will still set the price of electricity 30% of the time by 2030, despite most of the energy being produced from renewables. Solar and wind are now far cheaper than other forms of energy, and it's right that households across the UK and Derbyshire Dales in particular are able to benefit from these lower prices. Can the Chancellor therefore outline what steps she's taking to decouple the price of renewables from the price of gas and to drive down energy prices for homes in Derbyshire Dales?
This is the second energy price shock caused by a lack of availability of oil and gas in just 4 years. And what it shows is that we do need to invest more in homegrown energy to ensure security of supply and also of price to help people in Derbyshire Dales and right across the country. And that is why we are increasing the electricity generators levy, using that money to help people now, but crucially as an incentive to get electricity providers onto contracts for difference so that we don't have to pay more for electricity just because the price of gas is high.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor said that we did not start this war and we haven't joined this war. And the reason for that is because this war is illegal. Iran never posed an imminent threat. Pakistan are taking valiant steps to negotiate a deal which led to Iran opening the Strait of Hormuz. But unfortunately and absurdly, you got Donald Trump, which is blocking the Strait of Hormuz, causing a major economic crisis for everyone. Welcome the 5% cut in fuel duty and the £150 reduction in energy bills. But the reality is that's having insignificant impact on families, especially vulnerable families. So what steps, imminent steps, is the Chancellor going to take to help and shield them?
Well, I'd like to join the honourable gentleman in paying tribute to the work that Pakistan is doing to de-escalate this conflict by hosting peace talks. I expect that all members in the House would urge all parties to return to those negotiations as quickly as possible so that we can end the bloodshed, but also ensure that bills come back down for families and the price at the pumps. We're already taking action reducing household energy bills through the help with heating oil, and today's announcements on decoupling, on tiebacks, and last week's announcement on reducing business energy costs through the BICS scheme are all things that we are doing to help families and businesses now with the cost of electricity.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Chancellor agree that economic security, energy security and national security all go hand in hand, which is why homegrown, lower carbon power that we control is so important? And can she tell us more about how small modular reactors being delivered by Rolls-Royce, backed by this Labour government, will play its part in delivering that power, security and good British jobs?
Yeah. Well, it was great to meet with Rolls-Royce apprentices just last week in Downing Street with my honourable friend to see what difference this government's investment through the National Wealth Fund in small modular reactors will make, creating good jobs, paying decent wages, export opportunities from this new technology, and crucially giving us that energy security both on supply and price that investment in nuclear will provide.
Final question, Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, just so the Chancellor is aware, my constituents in Lagan Valley did not get £150 off their electricity bill. And I'm sure the Chancellor knows that that's because Northern Ireland is not in the same electricity market as the rest of the UK. But actually, even if you add the numbers together that we received through Barnett's, they do not total £150. So we hope that that lack of knowledge does not reflect the importance of Northern Ireland when this government comes to tackling the cost of living crisis. And when will you meet with my colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive to discuss how to help us throughout this crisis?
So Northern Ireland benefited from the consequentials from that policy, with the money going to the Northern Ireland Executive, because, as you say, they're on a different electricity market. But at the same time, we listened carefully to what MPs and members of the Northern Ireland Executive said around Northern Ireland's exposure to heating oil. And that's why when we made that support available, we did it through local authorities and locally, rather than a national scheme, recognising the higher exposure to heating oil in Northern Ireland than anywhere else in the country.
Point of order, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I seek your guidance in what I believe is truly a genuine point of order as to how Parliament and the public should understand the terminology in Erskine May about inadvertently misleading the House. Yesterday, my honourable friend for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk pointed out that, and I quote, "The Prime Minister has said various things about Peter Mandelson's vetting process that have now turned out not to be true." And he asked, does he accept that he inadvertently misled the House of Commons? The Prime Minister replied, "No, I did not mislead the House of Commons," before arguing that other information that had been withheld from him had led to this situation. Now, my understanding is that giving the House wrong information, but in good faith, is precisely what is meant by inadvertently misleading the House. But the Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand that, and the Foreign Secretary, whom I asked a similar question to a bit earlier this morning, doesn't seem to understand that. So is it me that is misunderstanding the meaning of the term to inadvertently mislead the House?
Can I thank the Right Honourable Member for his point of order and for having provided notice of it? Whilst ministers themselves are responsible for the accuracy of their remarks at the dispatch box, as Chair, I am very clear this is of the utmost importance and ministers must take their responsibilities to this House seriously. If the Right Honourable Member requires further advice on what may or may not constitute this House being inadvertently misled, I would suggest he follow up on the specific concerns with the Clerk of the Journals in the first instance. Point of order, Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, unfortunately the Chancellor's away, and the Chancellor did give a response to the Honourable Lady for Lagan Valley, but we have some concern, as I expressed to you when I went to the Chair just about 15-20 minutes ago in relation to what the Chancellor said. She referred to the £150, and we would be aware in Northern Ireland the £150 we think is not there, and that's our assumption. I also cast a mind back to when the Prime Minister was here Monday week ago, and he referred to the home heating oil that was given to Northern Ireland, and he would consider more. Today, we hope that the announcement was been made would ensure that those in Northern Ireland will be getting extra help. Quite clearly, it's not. I'm not here to catch the Chancellor out. It's not about that. It's about getting accuracy when it comes to responses and getting honesty in the replies. What can I do, what can we do on this side of the House to ensure that the Chancellor can correct the record?
Can I thank the Honourable Member for his point of order and for having given me some notice of it. I think it's very important, and he'll have heard the earlier responses, that the Chair is not responsible for ministerial answers, but ministers should be taking their responsibilities to make sure those answers are correct very seriously. I note that there are representatives of the Treasury bench still sat there. I'm sure the message will be passed back to the Chancellor, but he will have also heard her response to the Honourable Member for Lagan Valley. I don't intend to continue this debate via the Chair. Point of order, Carla Lockhart.
Thank you. Further to my honourable colleague's point of order, in response to my question, and I believe it is important to set the record straight, the Chancellor suggested that households in Northern Ireland got £150 off their energy bills in April. That is factually wrong and somewhat misleading, and I believe it is important that the record is set straight, because households in Northern Ireland will not see £150 off their bills like those in GB. The money which was received as a result of the Barnett consequential is still sitting in Sinn Féin's Economy Minister's departmental purse, unspent, and no forthcoming plans, and a refusal to engage with the Treasury to actually get the money spent. So I think not only do we need the record set straight, but we also need a plan to get the money to our constituents who are hard pressed. I wonder, will she advise me on how I can progress this matter?
Have heard my earlier responses. She most certainly has now put the matter firmly on the record. As I've said, the Chair is not responsible for ministerial answers, but I'm sure the Treasury bench has heard her and other points of orders loud and clear this afternoon.